All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we're talking about the Falcons' most recent roster moves, including adding two former Raiders in Nick Kwiatkoski and Bryan Edwards. Later, we'll be joined by Locked On Raiders hosts to get insights into those players, and then we'll be joined by Pro Football Focus's Eric Eager to get additional insights into the Falcons' 2022 schedule.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And like all Locked On Sports Atlanta podcasts, you can find Locked On Falcons free and available on a variety of podcast platforms Monday through Friday. We thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. And if you want to check us out on Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, or on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to your preferred podcast platform. And if you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, you'll get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So, guys, today's episode, we'll be talking about the Falcons' recent roster moves that they've made the past couple of days. Later, we'll be joined by Locked On Raiders host Yourboy Q to get his insight into two of those additions in Bryan Edwards and Nick Kwiatkoski. And then at the end of the episode, Pro Football Focus's Eric Eager will join us to talk a little bit more about the Falcons schedule. But let's talk about some of those roster moves, the notable additions. They traded for Bryan Edwards with the Raiders on Friday. They sent a 5th-round pick in 2023 to the Raiders, and I think they're getting back a 7th that same draft. They signed Nick Kwiatkoski, who spent the last 2 years with the Raiders, on Thursday. That move was officially made on Monday, but they agreed to terms on Thursday. They also picked up ex-Packers wide receiver Geronimo Allison on Monday, and they added 2 undrafted free agents, fresh off a rookie minicamp as well. Troy Anderson's Montana State teammate and cornerback / safety Trey Webb, and they also added Stanford blocking tight end Tusker Fisk, who played both sides at Stanford, so he's kind of the new Parker Hesse in that regard. So they also dropped a couple of players over the last couple of days. On Friday, they cut Kendall Sheffield. I didn't even realize that until Monday when the Texans claimed him off waivers, and they also made room for some of the other additions, cutting Chad Hansen, tight end Daniel Helm, cornerback / safety Luther Kirk, and tight end Ryan Becker. So this roster churning is not really surprising coming off of rookie minicamp. Kind of expected that they would probably add in a couple of guys, some UDFAs that impressed over the weekend, and maybe dumped a couple of other camp bodies. Allison is interesting. He was also at their rookie minicamp. I kind of see him more as a camp body. He primarily played in the slot with the Packers the last couple of years, struggled to really impact with the Lions this past year, even though they had, a very depleted wide receiver core. He's kind of a big slot, right? That's what he is. And I feel like the Falcons already have an abundance of players that can kind of provide that role. Now, as for Edwards, I think a lot of people are penciling him in as the wide receiver 2. Currently, I kind of have him as a wide receiver 3 right now, but certainly there's room for growth there. I think him being their ex-wide receiver, as we kind of talked about on the scouting report yesterday, talking about Drake London, there's a world where Edwards is the team's main X, which is the role he played with the Raiders this past couple of years, and they move London to be more of the Z in the offense. And if you don't know what those designations X and Z, I kind of explained it on yesterday's episode with Drake London, so I think probably skip to around like the 16-17 minute mark and you'll get a detailed explanation of that. But I believe that the initial plan right now, my guess is that the Falcons envision London to be the X, because I don't think the Falcons would have rated London as high on their draft board as they did if they saw him primarily as a Z wide receiver. I think they primarily see him as an X. So I think right now Edwards and Tate are kind of Auden Tate, that is, who they picked up earlier this offseason to kind of compete to be the backup X behind Drake London. And then that guy can probably come onto the field in 3 wide receiver sets. And then those situations, London will move from the X to the slot. And again, that was one of the things we discussed on yesterday's episode, where I think ideally Drake London's primary role with the Falcons offense is as a big slot, but we'll see how that plays out. So, as far as the trade goes, like, it's cool, right? I'm not as in love with Bryan Edwards as others are. He'd probably be a lot more intriguing to me if the Falcons didn't already have an abundance of sort of big wide receivers that, have question marks in terms of their ability to separate, but win primarily in contested catch situations, which is kind of the MO for Bryan Edwards. But as far as the price that they paid, essentially, a 6th round pick, when you factor in, giving up the 5th and getting back the 7th to kick the tires on him for like the next 2 years to see if he can be sort of a cheap number 2 wide receiver, behind Drake London, totally makes sense. So I don't have a problem with the trade, but I'm not like sitting here going like, oh man, this is the greatest trade ever. As for Kwiatkoski, his signing is a little bit more compelling to me because it kind of, you can imagine, this has potential Deion Jones ramifications, right? There's been a lot of speculation over the last couple of weeks that, Deion Jones is potentially on his way out here in Atlanta in a post June 1 trade. And I've expressed this on the podcast previously, I've had a healthy amount of skepticism over whether we'll see that sort of trade come to fruition, because I'm of the belief that the Falcons have been quietly shopping Deion Jones for 14 months. And since the trade hasn't happened yet, it's not particularly likely to happen in the future, but we'll see. I think this signing of Kwiatkoski is the best piece of evidence so far that suggests that maybe something is looming on the horizon, because I imagine, my suspicion is that the Falcons are signing Kwiatkoski because they're expecting him to start games and not just be a backup. They could envision him as a depth piece. That's certainly possible. But given the reports that Kwiatkoski had 3 visits line up, including one with the Raiders, he visited the Raiders first and visited the Falcons second, and I believe did not make that 3rd visit to his team because he signed within like 24 hours, or he agreed to terms in 24 to 48 hours of his visit with the Falcons being reported. That to me suggests that the Falcons probably offered him something that whatever that 3rd team was, that undisclosed 3rd team was, or the Raiders didn't offer him, which is probably a path, at the very least, a path to being the starter, if not outright being handed one of the starting spots and probably playing next to Rashaan Evans as that will linebacker in their defense. I think the case for Kwiatkoski is that you can make the case that he's the most balanced of the Falcons' current, top 5 now linebackers when it comes to run defense versus coverage ability, right? The MO on Evans is that he's a good run defender, but a little questionable in coverage. Obviously, we know Deion Jones is questionable against the run, but very good in coverage. Troy Anderson sort of fits that Deion Jones bill. You could probably make the case that prior to this acquisition in Kwiatkoski, Michael Walker was probably the most balanced guy that has both, acceptable to good, run defense and coverage ability. But I think now Kwiatkoski sort of overtakes him in that regard. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. If the Falcons do decide to move on from Deion Jones, they technically could cut him after June 1st, but they would have to eat like $19 million in dead money, which, obviously the Falcons are already eating a ton of money in dead money. So it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities, but you would sort of sit here and go like, really? Like that's what it came down to, where you just basically ate, $19 million in dead money just to be rid of Deion Jones, which again, beggars can't be choosers at this point in time, but we'll see how it all plays out. This is certainly something that we'll keep an eye on. If we hear any more news, it's been all quiet on the Deion Jones front in terms of, news and whatnot. So this is probably the biggest sort of shot across the bow as far as that goes. But we'll get additional insights on Nick Kwiatkoski as well as Bryan Edwards as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast, as we will be joined by Locked On Raiders host Yourboy Q to get his insights on what those guys are bringing to the table here in Atlanta and why they didn't necessarily work out in Las Vegas. And we'll do that as we continue today's episode. But before we get there, let me plug the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. You get 3 different shows all in the same podcast feed, covering all of Atlanta and Georgia sports, as well as national headline making sports news That's ATL Day Ones with Jarvis Davis and Tanisha Batiste, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, and A to Z with Mark Zeno. Find them all on your preferred podcast feed, including on YouTube. And guys, let me tell you also about Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, but even better than a candy bar because it not only tastes good, it's good for you because Built Bars are low in sugar, high in protein. I told you yesterday about me ordering a brand new box of birthday cake puff after Built Bars sent a free sample to me, and I basically mopped like 4 of them joints in like 6 hours once I opened that box. But I'm a big fan of the birthday cake. It's white chocolate, sprinkles. It's a birthday treat all summer long, but healthy for you. Then rather than eating, your funfetti cake or whatever the case may be. But if that's not interesting to you, you can get, there's savings. There's a sale on right now for a mixed box of the tried and true flavors. You get 15% off. And on top of that, you probably get an additional 15% off if you go to built.com and use the promo code of Locked15. That's the beautiful thing about Built Bar is that the promo code still works even when things are on sale. So you get additional savings. And that promo code is Locked15, LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, guys, you're Locked On Falcons, and I am joined by another illustrious guest. This is your boy Q, the host of the Locked On Raiders podcast. You also could check him out on Locked On Bets, Locked On NFL, and I'm sure plenty of other places. And Q is back with us. We had him at the beginning of the offseason to talk about Casey Hayward. Who knew that the Falcons would go out there and pick up a whole bunch of ex-Raiders over the last month, including a long snapper, Liam McCullough.
Yeah.
But we won't be talking about Liam McCullough on today's episode. We'll be focused on Bryan Edwards and Nick Kwiatkoski, 2 guys there. So Q, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It's so funny. Like you said, who knew that we'd be talking as much as we have this, this off season and everything. I didn't realize so many Raiders were going to head to the ATL, but that's cool. Marcus Mariota, you got Casey Hayward there, Bryan Edwards, Nick Kwiatkoski. I mean, man, the list goes on and on and on. Have fun with that one.
It's pretty much like the rule this offseason for the Falcons. If you played for the Titans, the Bears, or the Raiders, you can play for the Falcons. That's basically it.
Done deal. I like it.
Let's talk about Bryan Edwards, the most recent move of the Falcons, traded essentially a 5th for Bryan Edwards. Why didn't it work out for Bryan Edwards in Las Vegas?
It just didn't develop fast enough. Bryan Edwards was a 3rd-round pick, and he was a guy that came in with a lot of expectations back in 2020, and it just never panned out. But he has all the intangibles. He has everything that you want in a wide receiver, right? You want the size. His speed is good enough. It's not elite speed, but it's good enough. He's got hands. What I like about Bryan Edwards, he catches the ball without it getting to his body. He catches it literally with his hands. He's got big vice grips for hands, and that's what I really respect about him. It's just his game never developed as quickly as everyone thought. And then last season, when Henry Ruggs went down after that awful accident and the shakeout of that, the fallout from that, I thought it was going to be his opportunity to really step up and play a major role, and it just never really quite developed. The one thing I'll say about Bryan Edwards that did develop, he is really clutch when it comes to overtime. I don't know what it was about overtime. The Raiders had a lot of overtime games. He had like 100 and something yards worth of catches and reception yards in overtime for the Raiders. I don't know what it was about OT, but something about it. He all of a sudden just kind of stepped up and was a big time player. So I like it. It's so funny when the trade happened. I was on the radio and all of Raider Nation was upset. They were really angry about losing Bryan Edwards because of the potential. But the problem with this new regime is they're not going to just rest their soul on potential. If you either got it or you don't, and he just hasn't quite got there yet. So he's still young. He still has a lot of room to grow, and I think that if Atlanta could really work with him and kind of give him that time to develop, he could turn into a real deal steal.
Now let's talk about Nick Kwiatkoski, a free agent pickup from the Raiders, former Bear, of course. And what did he provide to the Raiders these last couple of years? From what I've heard is kind of opinions on him were kind of mixed. Like he was better than some of the other linebackers that the Raiders had, but he didn't quite live up to the price tag that they wound up paying for him a couple of years ago. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And the thing about it is the Raiders have had multiple defensive coordinators since he was a member of the team. So in 2020, when they actually brought him in the first time, he was under Paul Gunther, and he was good. He was probably the best Raiders linebacker that they had at the time. But that's not saying a whole lot because the linebacking core was was struggling. They brought in not only not Nick, but they also brought in Corey Littleton, and they thought they were going to shore up that linebacking core, and it just didn't work out that way. But he was a captain. He was really good. And then last season, he was under Gus Bradley, and he just didn't quite fit what Gus Bradley wanted to do. So he was more of a backup, kind of a role player type guy. And his injury history also had a bunch of injuries as well. So that kind of threw his his availability off. But for the most part, he's a good player. I mean, he's not someone that's going to wow you. He's not a guy that's going to, oh man, if it wasn't for that linebacker, man, the defense would be in shambles. Now, he's not going to be that guy, but he's going to have his role. He's going to play his game. He's going to be solid, and as long as he's on the field, whenever his number's called, he'll be fine. I mean, he's not going to be anything that's going to you're going to be praising him at the end of the season, but he's a good pickup as well.
So it sounds like the mentality that I think the Falcons want to have on defense, it comes from that Patriot school of thought of do your job, coming with Dean Pease, their defensive coordinator. Is that sort of kind of what Kwiatkoski is going to bring to the table?
Yeah, he's definitely going to do his job. I mean, that's the thing about it. And, it's funny because this new Raiders regime that used to be former Patriot regime actually had him in for a visit about a day before Atlanta decided to sign him. So, I mean, they were even looking at him again, maybe not to sign him immediately, but just to kick the tires on, hey, just in case we need another linebacker, let's see what this guy has. Let's see where his head is at. And he's a guy that had mentioned that he wouldn't have minded, returning to the silver and black. So it was funny the next day Atlanta goes and makes that signing. So I think that it's a pretty good pickup. He's going to do his job. He's not going to overwhelm you. He can create some turnovers here and there. He had a couple interceptions while with the Raiders. He's a football player. I mean, it's probably the best description of him. He's just one of those guys that's going to get out there. He's going to play ball. He's going to try to lead the best he can. Even when he was in Chicago, he was a guy that, he came in when other guys were banged up, and he was a guy that you didn't feel like, oh, he's going to be a liability because he's in the game. You knew that he was going to be able to do his job and fill that void. I just think that over the course of a now 17 game season, and with some bumps and bruises here and there, he's had a couple concussions. It's just injuries hamper his availability every once in a while, but all in all, man, I think he's a pretty good pickup. I think that the Falcons got a couple good players in Edwards and Kwiatkoski as well.
All right. Well, Q, let the Locked On Falcons listeners know what you're getting into on Locked On Raiders if they want to tune in to see and hear about the next Falcons acquisition.
Right, no doubt. No, just kind of still going over the draft picks that the Raiders were able to pick up, all 6 of them, and then undrafted free agents, deep diving into the schedule, of course, seeing where the sweet spots are potentially in the schedule. And we know the AFC West is going to be a juggernaut as far as in the regular season. So it's a lot of good stuff, a lot of fun on the podcast. Love to hear from Raider Nation as well. Always have calls and texts on the show, and a lot of good stuff. So yeah, man, you could always check out the Locked On Raiders podcast or anything else I do. You can always hit me on Twitter at Yourboy Q254. You can see exactly where I'm at and what I'm doing.
All right. Well, Q, I appreciate you coming back on. I look forward to our next chat when the Falcons pick up whoever the Raiders wind up cutting in training camp or whatever.
Probably next week or so. It's good times with you, my man. I always appreciate you.
All right, man. Same here. All right, guys. That's it with your boy Q. Go check out Locked On Raiders for additional insights into that team. But we still have more to come here on Locked On Falcons, talking with Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus. He's going to talk with us about the Falcons schedule and sort of, get a little bit more analytical, from PFF in that. And we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast, guys. But before we get there, I do want to tell you about Rock Auto, the proud sponsor of today's episode of Locked On Falcons. With ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why wait while the person behind the counter orders parts on their computer when you already have a computer with access to rockauto.com at home or in your pocket? Save time and money when using Rock Auto instead of spending up to twice as much for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years with reliably low prices for every single customer. They have everything you need from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Just go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So, guys, you are Locked On Falcons, and I am joined by an illustrious guest. This is Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus, and he's here with us to share his insights into the Falcons' formidable 2022 schedule. Eric, welcome to Locked On Falcons.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Fun day yesterday.
Yeah. Now, I look at the Falcons schedule. I see it's one of the tougher schedules in the league. I see a team that's probably going to struggle to approach 500 with this schedule. What sort of additional insights does Pro Football Focus offer from looking, the obvious, other than, hey, this is a pretty tough schedule?
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's not doing them a ton of favors. I think the one thing that they have going for them is, obviously opening at home, opening against a team that is breaking in a new head coach in Dennis Allen, and, kind of re-breaking in a quarterback in Jameis Winston. So there's some optimism there. They're only 3.5-point underdogs, which is right around where they were in week 18 of last year when they were trying to get to 8 wins and failed with Taysom Hill at the helm for New Orleans. It's a schedule that I think is not going to do them a ton of favors. They were a team last year where you look at their point differential versus where they actually finished, and you could probably make an argument that the 2020 Falcons were a better team than the 2021 Falcons, even though there was a 3-game win improvement for that team. So we'll see how it ends up going this year. NFC is weak. NFC South is even weaker. But the Falcons obviously are in a rebuilding situation.
Yeah. And one of the things I've discussed quite a bit on this podcast over the last couple of weeks since the draft is sort of the timetable to get a guy like Desmond Ridder on the field to sort of kick his tires to see what you have at that quarterback position. Marcus Mariota is perfectly competent starting quarterback in this league, can be that sort of bridge guy, but I don't think anybody has any idea that Marcus Mariota is a long-term answer for the Falcons at the quarterback position, and particularly if the Falcons struggle this year and are picking high, you want to know going into next year's draft, which most people believe is going to be much stronger at the quarterback position. Are you in a position to take a quarterback potentially high in that draft class? And I'm looking at the schedule and I see this sort of soft part of the schedule maybe around week 8. And it's sort of running for the next month or so through week 13 up to the bye week in week 14, which seems to be prime real estate for the Falcons. If they want to transition to Desmond Ridder, that probably is the point in the season where, to me, it makes the most sense, where you're not going to be throwing him to the Wolves quite to the degree that you would earlier in the season or potentially later in the season. Where do you sort of stand on that sort of notion?
Yeah, when you get the Panthers 2 out of 3 games there, that certainly helps. You get the Bears as well, who I think are in a similar situation. The Falcons, opted out of the Justin Fields sweepstakes last year. The Bears are in that, but they're not giving Fields a ton to work with there. So, when you look at Panthers, at home, then you have a tough Chargers team coming to Atlanta, and then you go to Carolina, and then you host the Bears, followed by a trip to Washington on Thanksgiving weekend. That's a 5-game stretch where if you want to acclimate a new quarterback, that's probably going to be an okay one. Look, I think that's maybe what they have to do. The issue is, and I think that this is the great part about taking a player like Desmond Ridder in round 3, is if he struggles, you just write it off and move on. I remember, a decade ago when the Panthers took Jimmy Clausen, and he was, and they worked on him for a year and he was terrible, and they just went right to Cam Newton. You've seen it a little bit even more with, the Jets going straight from Sam Darnold after 3 years to Zach Wilson, but even more drastically, the Arizona Cardinals going from Josh Rosen to Kyler Murray right away. I think that, with Ridder going in round 3, that gives the Falcons a ton of freedom. Mariota works out, that's fine. It's probably not going to happen. He's probably just, Mariota is probably good enough for you to find out what you have in Bryan Edwards just traded today, what you have in Drake London, so on and so forth. That's why you don't put a terrible quarterback there and tank. But mid-season, you also want to find out what you have in Ridder, and I think that stretch is probably amendable to that.
So I'm curious when PFF, sort of where they'll put their official seal on, sort of the expectations for this Falcons team at some point this summer. Any sort of insights into, where we can expect PFF to sort of grade this Falcons going into the 2022 season?
Yeah, we're working through the simulation today. I think you put the Falcons right around the 5 wins that the market has at them. We've always been a group that has liked Atlanta. I think anybody that's followed the team knows that, they haven't until last year, really, they haven't exactly punched above their weight class in terms of, like, when you look at point differential, when you look at how strong their quarterback play was, how good they were on the outside with guys like Julio Jones. Their records almost never reflected that. And then last season, they were a much weaker team, held together by a great quarterback. And they won more games than they probably should have. They beat the bad teams. They got blown out by the good teams. This season, obviously, without Matt Ryan in the fold, I think it's going to be hard. Now, there's stretches of games. We just talked about one where they might be favored in a few of those games. Like, I think Carolina is going to be horrid this year. I think they're going to be worse than Atlanta. So, there's going to be opportunity there to get right. And again, when you look at this team, the goal should be, not necessarily to win and make the playoffs, but it's to find out things about players that you're investing in, like Drake London and folks like that, more so than it is, I think, to win games. So I would put it probably at 4 or 5 wins. I don't necessarily know if I bet the under, just because I think that the rest of the NFC is bad. And Marcus Mariota, even though he didn't gel that well with Arthur Smith when they were in Tennessee, he's not a terrible quarterback, so they could be okay. But I also think, this is the first time any quarterback is going to start opening day for the Falcons other than Matt Ryan since Joey Harrington, right? And so we just simply don't. I don't know necessarily, much like the Saints with Sean Payton, I don't know if we appreciate how much Matt Ryan was holding things together, even if the results weren't all that great the last few years.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to sort of see. And I waffle between optimism and pessimism. I think the Locked On Falcons listeners probably think it's far on the side of pessimism, but that's my own personal burden to bear. But Eric, I really appreciate you sharing your insights into this Falcons team, their schedule and whatnot, and let the people know, where they can find your work, as well as some of the things that you guys at PFF are working on in this upcoming sort of dead time of the summer when there's not a whole lot of stuff going on besides Bryan Edwards trades.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Aaron. I'm at PFF_Eric on Twitter. I host a podcast called the PFF Forecast with my co-host George Shahuri, and we've been big Falcons fans over the years, just because, again, I think the market's underrated them. That's probably not going to be the case this year until they draft another great quarterback. But yeah, those are a couple places where you can find us. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting few months as we go into new eras in a lot of places in the league, including Atlanta.
Last question I have for you, Eric, before we duck out of it. I've heard that you're a Vikings fan, right?
I grew up in Minnesota, but I did root for the Vikings as a kid. Yeah.
Okay, so you have the full Falcon fan experience. I always consider the Vikings to basically be the Falcons of the North and the Falcons to be the Vikings of the South. So you have that exact experience.
My 13th birthday was January 17th of 1999, which is when the Atlanta Falcons went into the Metrodome and beat the Vikings to make their first Super Bowl. So and that was a great team with Chris Chandler and Terrence Mathis and Chuck Smith coming around the end to sack Randall Cunningham at the end of the first half and force a fumble. So yeah, I mean, the Vikings, look, and it was poetic last year, 2 years ago in 2020, when the Falcons, were 0-4 and fired everybody, and then came into US Bank Stadium and stomped the Vikings for their first win of the year. Those two teams, the Spider-Man meme.
There you go. All right, Eric, appreciate you joining me. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons podcast. We are building our way to an Arnold Ebiketie scouting report. The plan right now, we'll see if things throw wrenches into that plan. But the plan right now is we will wrap up this week on Friday, Thursday night, if you're checking us out on YouTube, with an Arnold Ebiketie scouting report. And tomorrow, the plan is we will have a guest on to talk a little bit more in depth about Arnold Ebiketie, the wet your whistle. I don't know what the plan is going to be for Wednesday's episode. Thursday's episode. I'm sorry. I do have a guest lined up potentially that could be on that episode later this week, but I do have some additional thoughts on some of the things that Arthur Smith said on 92.9 The Game last week that we might explore. So we'll just kind of play it by ear on terms of Thursday's episode. Maybe an opportunity for you guys to submit some questions and maybe do a little bit of a mailbag as well. So go ahead, submit those via Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons, via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. But yeah, definitely want to check out. We're going to get some more On the Ebikidi content in the coming days. So check that out with John Owing of the Dallas Morning News on tomorrow's episode. And then, of course, at the end of the week, the plan is to do the comprehensive scouting report where you'll get my sort of official final thoughts on Oral Kebede. Now that I've sort of poured through the film, I got like 2 more games to watch, which I'll probably get to after. As you guys are watching this or listening to this, I will probably have wrapped that all up. So that's the plan for the rest of the week, guys. I hope you appreciate today's episode, the great guests that we had, and Yourboy Q and Eric Eager. We got some more coming for you in the coming days and weeks. Appreciate it. Till then.